Welcome brave souls to Dreadful Diaries, where the shadows whisper secrets and the night holds untold horrors. If you crave the thrill of the unknown, make sure to subscribe and join our community of fellow horror enthusiasts. Now dim the lights, grab a blanket, and let's dive into our first tale of terror.
Eli Weaver had always preferred the night shift. There was a calm to it, the hush after the world turned in. The hours when a building like the old Grant Tower felt like its own living thing, breathing through the walls. He'd done security for 8 years now, mostly at half-empty corporate offices that had seen better decades. Grant Tower was exactly the type of place people made up ghost stories about, 14 stories tall, Art Deco in style, its marble lobby cracked and yellowed with time. Half the building was rented out to cheap law firms and accounting offices. The other half was empty, abandoned floors sealed off with dusty caution tape, remnants of a failed renovation that no one bothered to finish. Eli didn't mind the long empty halls or the echoing stairwells. He liked being alone. Less trouble, less explaining. And if he heard the old elevator whine when no one called it, he ignored it. Old buildings did strange things at night. His security office was tucked behind the lobby. A cramped room lined with gray metal lockers, a tiny desk, and an ancient bank of flickering CRT monitors showing feeds from battered security cameras. Most didn't even have sound. When he got bored, he'd flip between them like TV channels, watching the empty corridors and stairwells roll by in ghostly black and white. The first time he saw it, he thought it was a trick of the light. It was just after 2:30 a.m., the dead hour, when the city itself seemed to hold its breath. He'd made a cup of instant coffee, ignoring the stale taste, and leaned back to watch the feeds. That's when he noticed something in camera 9, a view of the 6th floor hallway. That floor was sealed off for asbestos removal that never happened. No one ever went up there. At the far end of the corridor, between two battered exit signs, was a figure. A person. Eli leaned forward, squinting. The camera was old, the resolution poor, the figure was little more than a dark silhouette, standing perfectly still. He waited for them to move, to wave, to stumble, to give any sign they were a drunk who'd wandered in. Nothing. Just stillness. He picked up the walkie and spoke into it. "Hello? You're not supposed to be there. If you can hear me, wave your hand." No movement. Annoyed, Eli grabbed his flashlight, shrugged into his coat, and took the elevator up to 6. He stepped into the dim hallway, the air smelled stale, dry. Plastic sheets rustled in a draft he couldn't feel. He shone the beam up and down the corridor. Nothing. No footprints in the dust. No echo of footsteps. Back in the security office, he checked camera 9 again. The hallway was empty. He told himself it must have been a glitch. He went back to his seat, but for the rest of the shift, he kept glancing at that feed. Nothing. The next night, he saw it again. Same time, 2:30 a.m. The figure was back in camera 9, in the same spot. This time, Eli stayed put. He watched. 10 minutes passed. 20. The figure never moved. He leaned so close to the screen he could hear the static hum. He looked away for a second to sip his coffee. When he looked back, the figure was halfway down the hallway. His mouth went dry. He forced himself to stand, shoving the chair back. "Probably just someone messing with me," he muttered. He checked the other cameras. Empty. He tried to radio for backup, but the only other guard on the roster, Malik, had called in sick that night. So he went up again. 6th floor. same stale air. Same echoing plastic. But no person. His flashlight beam cut through dust motes, but there were no footprints. He reached the spot where the figure had been and felt a sudden chill that prickled his skin. Back in the office, camera 9 was black static. By the third night, Eli was obsessed. He brought in his own camcorder, one of those cheap handhelds. He propped it up in front of the security monitor and let it run, recording camera 9. He thought maybe if he had footage, he could show it to his boss, prove he wasn't seeing things. At exactly 2:30, the shape appeared again. Closer this time. Almost halfway to the camera. Eli sat there for an hour, staring at it. His eyelids drooped, just for a second. When he jerked awake, the figure was nearly at the lens. All he could see was darkness, like the outline of a coat pressed against the glass. He hit rewind on the camcorder and squinted at the tiny flip screen. The tape showed the figure appear, then inch forward, not walking, just snapping closer when the camera's gaze flickered. And at the very end of the recording, the screen glitched and showed a face, pale, hollow-eyed, mouth yawning impossibly wide, before cutting to static. He played it again and again until the camcorder battery died. He asked around the next day, casually at first. "Hey, Malik, you ever see anything weird on the 6th floor cameras?" Malik just shrugged. "Nope." "Well, that floor's bad luck, though. Few years ago, one of the renovators fell down the elevator shaft. They say he'd been working alone when the power cut. They found him days later. Nobody claimed the body." Eli felt the knot in his stomach twist tighter. He showed Malik the tape. But the recording just showed static now, nothing at all. Like it never existed. Malik laughed it off. "Man, you need sleep." By Friday, Eli's hands shook every time he checked camera 9. The figure was always there now, a bit closer every night. He called in sick but couldn't stay away. He sat in the security office, the bank of monitors humming, the hum digging into his skull. At 2:28 a.m., the lights flickered. He felt the air get heavy, like the building itself was exhaling something cold and wet. 2:30 a.m. There it was. Right in front of the camera now. The shape filled the whole screen. For the first time, Eli saw it clearly, a tall man in an old coat, the brim of a hat pulled low over sunken eyes. The mouth moved, no sound came through, but the lips kept opening wider, wider, until they split the face in two. The feed flickered. The same shape appeared on camera 3, the lobby. Then camera 2, the hallway outside the security room. Eli backed away. He grabbed his keys and bolted for the door, but it was stuck. The knob turned, but the door wouldn't budge. The cameras behind him hissed with static. He turned back to look at them, and on every monitor, the same pale face stared back, grinning. He pounded the door. "Let me out," he screamed. The lights flickered. Something tapped on the glass behind him, a single finger, pale and rotting, knocking in rhythm with his heartbeat. When the day shift guard, Malik, arrived at dawn, he found the security office door ajar. Inside, the monitors were on, camera 9 showed nothing but a blank, dusty hallway. Eli's keys were on the desk, along with his jacket and flashlight. No sign of Eli. No record of him leaving the building. Later, a technician pulled the footage from the night shift. Hours of static. But right at 2:30 a.m., the tape glitched, a single frame of a pale face, its mouth split open, eyes hollow, staring straight at the camera, before the recording cut to black. Malik transferred to another site soon after. Grant Tower still stands. And if you wander through its halls at 2:30 a.m., some say you might see a figure standing perfectly still at the end of the corridor. It was pushing 1 a.m. when Jayden Price guided train 647 onto the platform at Hawthorne Station. He'd been driving the Red Line for 7 years, but these last trains always felt different. The tunnels seemed deeper, the silence in the carriages heavier, the darkness between stations thicker than it was in the day. Hawthorne was his second-to-last stop. The only thing left was the final run to Ardenwood, the last stop before the train would go out of service for the night. He was already thinking about home, the leftover takeout in his fridge, the shower waiting to wash off the grit of a 12-hour shift, the stiff bed that never felt so inviting as it did in those last sleepy minutes on the tracks. Then he saw her. She was standing perfectly still under the old sodium lamp. Her clothes were all wrong for the season, a thin, pale dress that fell to her ankles, like something you'd see in an old photograph. Her hair was dark, pinned up in an old-fashioned bun. Jayden leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. She wasn't looking at the train exactly, more like she was staring just above it, at something behind him. Her eyes seemed dark, hollow in the flickering light. He pulled the train to a stop. The doors hissed open. Nobody got on. He watched her in the side mirror. She didn't move. Didn't even twitch. He picked up the PA mic. "Last train, ma'am. Next stop's Ardenwood. You coming or not?" No reaction. The air conditioning hummed in the cab. The platform remained empty except for her. He waited another full minute, drumming his fingers on the controls. Then he shrugged, flipped the switch, and let the doors close. When the train pulled away, he glanced back at the platform, but it was empty. The woman was gone. 10 minutes later, the train coasted into Ashbury Station. It was an old, mostly disused platform. The overhead lights buzzed and flickered, revealing more grime than light. Jayden wasn't expecting anyone here. It was rare enough for someone to board at Hawthorne that late, but Ashbury was practically abandoned after 10. He slowed anyway, eyes drifting along the platform out of habit. His stomach dropped. She was there. Same woman, pale dress, dark hair pinned up, standing under the flickering light at the far end of the platform. She was turned toward the tracks, head tilted as if she were listening for something deep in the tunnel. A chill ran up Jayden's arms. He opened the doors. Nobody moved. He leaned out the window. "Hey! Miss!" He felt stupid yelling into the dark, but his voice sounded oddly muffled, as if the station walls swallowed the sound. She didn't turn. She didn't even blink. "Look, I can't wait here all night," he called. Nothing. He closed the doors. As the train eased forward, he looked back one last time, but the platform was empty again. Jayden's fingers drummed on the throttle as the train clattered toward Ardenwood. He found himself remembering an old story one of the senior operators had told him back when he was still learning the routes. "You ever see the lady?" The guy had asked, leaning back with a grin that showed too many teeth. "What lady?" "She rides the platforms after midnight. Always waiting for the last train. Only, she never gets on. Just stares and stares. They say she's waiting for someone who never came home, or for the train that never stopped for her when it should have." Jayden had laughed it off then. He didn't feel like laughing now. The last stretch between Ashbury and Ardenwood was the longest, a 4-minute crawl through a tunnel that felt more like the throat of some enormous animal than a man-made passage. Water dripped from cracks in the concrete. His headlights cut tunnels of weak light through the pitch dark. He tried to focus on the tracks, but every few seconds he caught himself glancing at the side mirrors, half expecting to see her walking alongside the train, matching its speed in the dark. Once, just once, he thought he caught a flicker of white between the tunnel lights, as if someone were standing in the maintenance alcove, watching. But when he looked again, there was nothing. Ardenwood Station loomed out of the dark, its wide concrete platforms lit by a single buzzing fixture. This was the end of the line. No passengers in sight. He slowed the train to a gentle stop, hoping he wouldn't see her this time. She was there. Standing on the far platform, right under the light. Her eyes caught his headlights, two black pits that reflected nothing. This time, she was facing him directly, her mouth slightly open as if she were about to speak. The hairs on Jaden's neck stood on end. He opened the doors. Nothing. The air inside the cab felt colder now, a damp chill that clung to his skin. He could see her lips moving now. No sound. Just the shape of words he couldn't understand, or didn't want to. He picked up the radio. "Control, this is 647 at Ardenwood. I've got a loiterer on the far platform. Possible trespasser. Can I get someone to?" The radio hissed back, but no words came through. Just static. He looked back out the window. She was gone. Jaden stood up. He hated leaving the cab while the train was still in service, but every instinct told him he had to see for himself. He stepped onto the platform. Empty. Just the hum of the old transformer box and the click of the cooling train. He walked the length of the platform, eyes darting to the shadows under the benches, the utility doors. Nothing. Then he heard it, the faint click of a door behind him. He spun around. The last car's door was half open. A soft, stale draft blew out of it, carrying a smell like damp earth and old iron. His pulse hammered. He stepped back inside, moving down the aisle. He checked each seat, empty, empty, empty. The overhead lights flickered. Halfway down the car, he saw her. She sat in the very back seat, hands folded in her lap, hair damp and stringy around her face. Her eyes were deep hollows. Her dress looked soaked through, stained darker in places where the fabric clung to her skin. Jaden opened his mouth but nothing came out. He backed away, step by step. Her head turned, following him, but her body never moved. He bolted for the front of the train. Back in the cab, he locked the door, his hands trembling on the control lever. He knew he should radio control again, but the static hiss was louder now, almost like whispering voices just beyond the edge of hearing. He didn't wait for permission. He throttled up, pulling the train out of Ardenwood, even though it was the end of the line. He couldn't stop. He wouldn't. The tunnel swallowed the train again, the lights whipping by like ghostly ribs. He risked a glance at the rear-view camera. She was there. Not sitting anymore, standing in the aisle now, hand resting on a pole, her eyes locked on the cab door. Every time the train hit a switch, she jolted closer, but never moved her feet. Jaden's mind raced. He didn't remember switching tracks, but the tunnel kept going, deeper than it should, miles longer than any stretch he'd ever driven. The radio crackled. A voice, distant and broken, whispered through, next stop, but the rest drowned in static. No one knows how long that final ride lasted. Hours later, when the maintenance crew found train 647, it was parked on a dead-end spur deep under the city, a tunnel that had been closed since the 1960s. The cab was empty. The doors were open, the lights flickered weakly over rows of silent seats. No sign of Jayden. Just a faint, wet footprint in the cab and a single handprint on the window, small, pale, and pressed flat against the glass, as if someone had been watching him drive. Some nights, they say, if you stand on the platform at Hawthorne or Ashbury or Ardenwood after the last train leaves, you might see her standing there, waiting. And if you do, never meet her eyes. Because she's always looking for a conductor who'll take her home. And if you let her on board, you might never see daylight again. Mason had been the night auditor at the Grayson Hotel for almost 2 years. It was the kind of job you took when you liked your peace and quiet, and Mason liked both. At night, the Grayson felt like a mausoleum, the grand marble lobby empty, chandeliers dark, the old elevator humming behind brass doors that hadn't been polished in decades. Only the sound of the mop dragging across the marble floor and the steady tick of the lobby clock kept him company between reports. He didn't mind. It paid well enough. The hotel was half forgotten, perched on the edge of downtown, and the few guests they had were businessmen too tired to complain about the flickering lights or the occasional groaning pipes. But the mirrors were another story. The Grayson had mirrors everywhere, gaudy, gilded monstrosities from when the place opened back in the 1920s. They lined the lobby walls, reflected the elevator doors, bounced back the dim yellow glow from the table lamps at the front desk. Mason hated them. The cleaning crew was supposed to polish them during the day, but they never really shone. Too old. The silver backing had gone cloudy in places, making the reflections ripple like water when you looked too long. But that night, a Thursday in late October, one of those mirrors would change everything. Mason glanced at the old brass clock above the check-in desk. 3:03 a.m. The quietest part of the night. He'd just finished the bank drop and was mopping the lobby, trying to keep his eyes open. His mop swished in lazy figure eights near the elevator when something caught his eye, movement in the big rectangular mirror mounted opposite the lift. At first he thought it was just him. He raised a hand, his reflection did the same. But then he noticed the figure standing next to him in the mirror. A man. Tall, pale, wearing an old-fashioned suit, like something out of a black and white film. Mason's heart thumped. He spun around. The marble floor behind him was empty. Nobody near the elevator. He looked back at the mirror. The man was still there. He was staring right at Mason, head slightly tilted, as if amused by his shock. Mason stepped closer, mop squeaking on the wet floor. He stared at the reflection, eyes watering. The man in the mirror had a face too sharp, like a wax figure left too close to a fire, eyes deep set, skin the color of a bruise. "Can I help you?" Mason asked, his voice cracking in the empty lobby. The man didn't speak. But he smiled, wide, too wide, and lifted his hand to press it against the glass. Mason could see every finger, pale and thin, pressing against the inside of the mirror like it was a window. He turned around again. Nothing. When he looked back, the man's eyes locked with his, and then he turned, took a step forward, and walked straight into the glass. There was no sound, no crack, no shatter. The reflection just swallowed him. 1 second he was there, Next, the mirror reflected only Mason's pale, stunned face. Mason stumbled back behind the front desk, fumbled with the old computer, and pulled up the lobby security feed. He rewound the footage. He could see himself mopping, and behind him, the elevator doors and the big mirror. But the man never appeared on camera. Only Mason's reflection, talking to empty air, pointing, recoiling. He checked the other feeds, the entrance, the hallways, nothing. Just him, alone, arguing with a ghost. Mason almost called the police. Instead, he picked up the old landline and dialed Dave, the night manager, who'd worked the Grayson for decades. Dave answered on the second ring, his voice hoarse. "You see him, didn't you?" Dave said before Mason could explain. "See who?" Mason croaked. "The Mirror Man. You shouldn't look too long. He likes to be seen. That's how he gets out." Dave sounded drunk or half asleep. Mason wanted to slam the phone down, but his hands wouldn't stop shaking. "It's just an old story," Dave said, voice softer. "Back when they built this place, they said a guest, some big-shot businessman, checked in, never checked out. They found him dead in his room, every mirror in the suite covered in handprints from the inside. After that, people see him sometimes. Late. Always in the reflection. Always trying to step through." Dave hung up. The dial tone buzzed in Mason's ear. Mason couldn't sit still. He paced the lobby, eyes darting to every polished surface. Each mirror seemed to ripple at the edges. The big one by the elevator was the worst. Its silver backing seemed darker now, as if something were moving just behind the glass. He forced himself to look away. He wiped down the desk, checked the register, mopped the same spot twice. But every time he caught the mirror in the corner of his eye, he felt the man watching. At 3:47 a.m., he saw him again. This time, the man was standing inside the elevator reflection, behind the closed brass doors. His mouth moved slowly, though Mason heard no words, he felt them rattle his teeth. "Let me in." Mason turned away, shut his eyes tight. When he looked back, the elevator doors opened. Of course, the real elevator was empty, but in the reflection, the man stepped out, his footsteps soundless on the mirror's polished floor. Mason stumbled back behind the front desk. He ducked low, staring only at the worn carpet. He remembered something Dave had said once about the mirrors in the old suites: they don't just reflect. They hold things, old things that want to come through. He crawled to the breaker box in the back closet, heart hammering. He didn't know if it would help, but he shut down every light in the lobby, plunging the mirrors into darkness. When he crept back out, the big mirror reflected nothing but the faint, gray dawn bleeding through the front doors. For a moment, Mason thought he was safe. Until he saw the faint outline of a hand pressed flat against the inside of the glass. Waiting. 9. The replacement. When the day shift manager came in at 6 a.m., she found Mason's mop bucket overturned in the lobby. The lobby lights were off, the elevator doors stood open. The big mirror by the elevator was spotless for the first time in years, as if someone had wiped it from the inside. But Mason was gone. His phone and name badge were on the front desk, but no sign of him in the break room, the maintenance closet, or the locked back offices. They checked the cameras. All they saw was Mason talking to his own reflection, leaning so close to the glass it looked like he was about to kiss it. Then static. A new night auditor replaced him 3 days later. Sometimes, around 3 a.m., the new guy swears he sees someone standing in the mirror by the elevator, a man in an old suit, pale hand pressed flat against the glass. And if you stand too long, he'll meet your eyes, tilt his head, and step forward. Right through the mirror. Right into your world. It was Eliza's third week on the job as a 911 dispatcher, the graveyard shift, the one nobody wanted. She liked the nights, though. Less chaos, fewer traffic pileups, more time to learn the ropes. On quiet nights she'd spin in her chair, sip terrible gas station coffee, and listen to the hum of the monitors, fire, paramedics, police all flickering across her screen. Her supervisor, Detective Reese, had worked dispatch before moving up to handle after-hours calls. He was gruff but kind, the sort who could calm a drunk caller with 2 words, or break up a domestic dispute just by staying on the line. At 2:11 a.m., the red phone line blinked. An incoming call. Eliza clicked her headset on. 911, what's your emergency? Static. A low, crackling hiss. Then a voice, so faint she had to press her hand to her other ear to hear. Help me. He's coming. I can't get out. The voice sounded male, young, out of breath. Eliza straightened. Sir? Can you tell me where you are? He's coming. He's coming. He's, click. The line went dead. She checked the screen, it showed the call came from a payphone on Holloway Avenue. She frowned. There was nothing there now, just the old Fairchild textile factory, abandoned since the late 90s when a fire gutted half of it. She flagged Reese down, told him what happened. He sighed, rubbed his eyes, and said, probably kids messing around. Nobody's been near that factory for years. Before Eliza could reply, the phone line blinked again. Same number. She answered. 911, what's your emergency? Same voice, more desperate this time. She could hear wind howling in the background, the hiss of static. Help me. Please, he's here, I can't get out. He's in the walls. Oh God. The call ended with a sharp, metallic screech. Reese leaned over her shoulder, eyes narrowed at the trace log. Did you say it's that payphone again? Eliza nodded. Why? There's no way a payphone's still working there, right? Reese stared at the empty hallway for a moment. Call it in. Send a unit. Officer Patel was the closest. He rolled up to Holloway Avenue 15 minutes later. His radio crackled through Eliza's headset. She could hear the crunch of gravel under his boots as he stepped out of his cruiser. Dispatch, this is Patel. I'm at the factory. There's no payphone here, just a busted pole where it used to be. Lots of weeds, broken glass. Doesn't look like anyone's been here in decades. Eliza pressed her mic. Copy that, Officer Patel. Could you check inside? Just to be sure. A sigh. Affirmative. She and Reese listened in silence as Patel's footsteps echoed inside the crumbling factory. The place had been gutted by fire and left to rot, rusted machines, scorched walls, shattered windows. Dispatch, Patel said, voice tight. I'm hearing something. Like a phone ringing? Static. A sharp bang echoed through the mic, then silence. Patel? Officer Patel, do you copy? No reply. Reese grabbed the old logbook from the dusty corner of the office. He flipped through yellowed pages until he found it, a record from exactly 20 years ago, to the day. The entry was short. February 3rd, 2:12 a.m., distress call from payphone outside Fairchild factory. Caller, George Hillman, night security guard. Repeated, help me, he's coming, I can't get out. Officers arrived to find Hillman dead inside the factory, apparent accident, crushed by falling beams. Case closed. Eliza's blood ran cold. That's what he said. Word for word. Reese nodded. Hillman's been dead 20 years. And that payphone was pulled out right after the fire. They tried Patel's radio again. Still nothing. Another unit was dispatched, this time, 2 cars, floodlights, and backup. When they arrived, they found Patel standing by the front gates of the factory. He looked pale, shivering even though it wasn't cold. Patel? Reese asked through the open radio. You okay? Patel cleared his throat. Did you guys hear him too? Hear who? The security guard. Said he needed help getting out. Said he'd been waiting 20 years for someone to answer. Reese looked at Eliza. Bring him in. That place is getting boarded up tomorrow. I'm done with these calls. Patel took a leave of absence. Eliza stayed on dispatch, but every year when February 3rd came around, she'd find herself staring at that blinking red line, waiting. It always rang. Same voice. Same desperate plea, help me. He's coming. I can't get out. And somewhere on Holloway Avenue, people still swear they see the old payphone, just for a moment, glowing in the dark, receiver swinging from its cord. If you ever pick it up, they say, you'll hear him breathing on the line, the security guard who never got out, still begging for someone to answer. When the clock struck 2:15 a.m., the last neon, open 24 hours, sign flickered in the window of Rosie's diner. Matt Hayes had been closing up alone for 3 months now. He'd taken the graveyard cook shift because it meant no boss breathing down his neck, no drunks to mop up after, just him, the hiss of the fryer, the occasional trucker's order scribbled on a ticket, and the gentle hum of the walk-in freezer. Tonight was especially dead. Even the regulars, the late-night dishwashers and graveyard nurses, had called it an early night. Matt mopped the checkered tile floor while the old jukebox played static-laced doo-wop from the 50s. He liked to leave the freezer for last. He'd inherited that habit from the previous closer, Marty, never mop near the freezer until the end, Marty had said, though he never explained why. It started with a single, dull thump. So soft that Matt thought it was the pipes rattling again. Rosie's was old. The kind of place that had 100 stories baked into its greasy walls. He dipped the mop in the bucket again, swiped the water across the floor, and heard it again, thump, thump. Like a fist against metal. Matt paused, the mop handle dripping onto his shoe. He turned to the back, the freezer door was shut tight. He hadn't been inside since his last run to restock burger patties 3 hours ago. He walked over, footsteps echoing in the dark kitchen. He pressed an ear to the heavy metal door, so cold it made his skin sting. He waited, holding his breath. Then, knock. 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 A pause. Then the muffled rasp of a voice. Hey man, help me, can you hear me? I can't get out. Matt jumped back so hard he knocked over the mop bucket, water sloshing across the tiles. He steadied himself on a shelf, staring at the freezer handle. He knew no one was supposed to be in there. The only other guy working that night, Carl the dishwasher, had clocked out at midnight after cleaning the fryers. Matt's mind flew back to the first week he'd started, the night Marty told him the old cook's ghost story. "Used to be a guy, long before my time," Marty had said, wiping down the counter while Matt restocked ketchup bottles. "Name was George Ellis. Nice guy. Didn't show up one morning. Turns out he'd gone in the freezer to grab some sausage links, but the latch jammed behind him. They didn't find him until dawn. Door stuck shut, fans blasting all night. By the time the manager opened up, the guy was frozen to the floor, still in his apron. Marty had tapped the freezer door with a finger. Tap tap tap. They say every so often, you hear him knocking. Wants out. But if you open it, Marty had just smiled. Nobody knows what happens if you open it. Matt looked around the empty kitchen, heart hammering in his throat. The voice inside knocked again, weaker this time. "Help me, please, it's so cold." Matt told himself it had to be a prank. Maybe Carl had come back in to scare him. But the latch was an old steel bolt you couldn't open from the inside, that's why the story even existed. He reached for the handle. It was freezing to the touch, frost biting into his palm. He hesitated. "Hey, who's in there?" he called. "Quit messing around, man. This isn't funny." No answer. Only the soft hiss of the fan inside the freezer. Then the voice, closer now, as if right behind the door. "Don't leave me here, open up." 5. The cold hand. Matt pulled the bolt. The heavy door groaned open an inch, letting out a burst of icy fog that bit into his cheeks. He peered inside, flicked the freezer light switch, but the bulb flickered and died. Inside, racks of meat and boxes of fries glowed a pale blue under the emergency light. Frost clung to every surface like old snow. He leaned closer. "Hello? If this is a joke, you got me. Come on out." From the darkness, something moved, a shape half buried behind the stacked boxes. A man, or what looked like a man, crouched in the far corner. He wore an old cook's apron, the fabric frozen stiff. Matt's breath caught in his throat. The figure's eyes snapped open, milky white, and fixed on him. Then it lunged forward, a hand, icy blue and rotted around the nails, shot out and grabbed Matt's wrist. The cold was so sharp he felt it in his bones. The fingers dug in, so cold they burned, frost spreading up his arm like veins of ice. Matt screamed and yanked back. The grip tightened for a heartbeat, then slipped off. He stumbled back, the freezer door swinging wide. He kicked it shut with his foot and slammed the bolt back in place. Inside, the knocking started again, only this time, it was on the metal from the inside. Bang! 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 Then silence. 6. The mark. Matt collapsed to the floor, cradling his wrist. The skin where the hand had grabbed him was pale, already blistering white like frostbite. An unmistakable shape of 5 fingers circled his wrist, long, thin, and splayed too wide to be human. He shivered violently, unable to feel his fingers. He grabbed his phone, tried to call the manager, but the line kept dropping. After a while, the knocking stopped. The freezer door hissed with frost at the edges, but the kitchen was deathly still. Matt must have dozed off on the break room bench. When the morning cook, Sheila, came in at 6, she found him huddled under an old blanket, his wrist wrapped in a rag that was already turning blue with ice. They called an ambulance. The paramedic lifted the rag, the frostbitten handprint was clear as a photograph. A perfect mark. The police came later, out of curiosity more than anything. They found no footprints in the frost on the freezer floor. Just racks of food, untouched. No signs anyone had been in there for years. But on the inside of the door, faintly visible under the frost, someone had traced a single word. Help. Matt never went back to Rosie's. His wrist healed, but the ghostly handprint left behind pale scars that never faded, no matter how warm his skin got. Sometimes, when he can't sleep, he rubs his fingers over the ridges of that handprint, and swears he can still feel the cold pressing through. Rosie's diner still stands. The freezer hums every night, the latch sticking like always. If you work there alone, and you hear a knock from inside the walk-in freezer, don't open it. Because some ghosts never thaw. And once you've felt his touch, you'll carry his chill forever. When you work the overnight at a roadside motel, you get used to weird sounds. Jace Miller knew that. He was 24, paying off community college one graveyard shift at a time at the Moonlight Pines Motel, a rundown spot on the edge of the highway near an old mining town. Most nights were the same, drunks trying to check in without ID, kids sneaking into the pool after midnight, the occasional guest yelling about bedbugs. But that Friday, sometime past 2 a.m., Jace heard something he'd never heard before. It was a scraping, echoing up through the vent behind the front desk. Like someone dragging something heavy across concrete, deep under the building. The scraping stopped, replaced by a dull thumping, 3 knocks, rhythmic, steady, like someone rapping on pipes. Jace muted the security monitors. He leaned down, pressed his ear to the old metal grate. The sound was clearer now, thud, thud, thud. He sat back, heart thumping. He'd heard stories. Everyone who'd worked at the Pines long enough knew them. The place had been built in the early 70s, but before that, the land had been a coal mine. People said there were old service tunnels beneath the ground, most sealed up when the motel was built. But nobody had ever mentioned a door. Jace grabbed the big ring of master keys and headed down the hall behind the front desk. Past the maintenance closet, past the moldy ice machine, until he noticed something he'd never really seen before. A square outline in the faded wood paneling. It looked like part of the wall, until you saw the tarnished metal knob hidden behind a mop and some stacked toilet paper. When he pressed his ear to it, he heard it again, scrape, scrape, scrape. The key fit the rusted lock on the third try. The door creaked open, spilling stale, cold air into the hallway. A single bulb flickered to life overhead, connected to old wires that looked like they hadn't been touched in 50 years. The stairs beyond the door were rough concrete, crumbling at the edges, leading down into pitch black. Jace hesitated. He knew he should shut the door, lock it back up, forget he'd ever heard anything. But that steady knock, thud, 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 echoed up the stairs. He flicked his flashlight on and stepped inside. The door swung shut behind him, sealing him in darkness. At the bottom of the stairs, the air smelled like earth and mold, and something else, like old rusted metal. The tunnel stretched out ahead, cut into the clay and rock, framed by old wooden support beams that looked ready to collapse. His flashlight beam danced over graffiti, mostly faded, but a few newer words stood out, scratched deep into the beams, "Don't go past the third lamp." A work lamp dangled from a nail every 50 feet or so. The first 2 flickered dimly when he tapped their cords. Beyond that, the tunnel curved into shadow. And there, drifting up from the darkness, came the sound of shuffling footsteps. Like bare feet on wet stone. Jace's breath clouded in the freezing air. His footsteps crunched over gravel as he edged forward, sweeping the flashlight ahead. He passed the third lamp. Its bulb was smashed, wires dangling like veins. Beyond it, the tunnel walls glistened with damp. The footsteps stopped. Silence, except for his heartbeat and the slow drip of water from somewhere in the stone. Then came the whisper. So soft it felt like it slid right into his ear. "Don't leave." He swung the flashlight wildly. The beam caught an old metal door at the very end of the tunnel. Heavy, rusted, marked with the faded stamp of the old mining company that had owned the land. There was a shape standing just beyond the door. Pale, thin, one hand pressed against the glass porthole. The figure didn't move. Jace edged closer, trying to convince himself it was a trick of the light, maybe an old mannequin left behind when the mine closed. But as his flashlight beam steadied, he saw it clearer. A man in a filthy miner's uniform, boots rotted to his ankles. His eyes were sunken, lids frozen half-closed. His lips moved, but the words came out like wine through broken pipes. "Don't leave. Don't leave me down here." Jace staggered back, nearly dropping his light. The figure's hand scraped at the glass, leaving streaks of wet clay. Then the door rattled, once, twice, like something pushing from the other side. He turned to run, but the tunnel behind him looked longer now, stretched like a funhouse hallway. Shadows crawled along the ceiling, arms outstretched, dragging fingernails along the beams. Suddenly, his mind flashed back to something his manager, Tommy, had once joked about: "Don't go poking around the old service tunnels. Old miners got sealed down there during a cave-in. If you knock, they knock back, they want you to let them out. But they ain't the same anymore." Thud, thud, thud. A single knock, echoing through the dirt walls. Then dozens more, like hands drumming on hollow coffins. Jace bolted. He sprinted past the broken lamp, past the scrawled warning, "Don't go past the third lamp." His flashlight flickered, then died. He stumbled up the steps in darkness, scraping his knees on the rough concrete. He slammed into the hidden door, found the knob, and burst back into the hallway behind the front desk. The knocking didn't follow. The scraping didn't echo anymore. Just the normal hum of the motel's old refrigerator. Jace slammed the secret door shut, locked the deadbolt, and dragged a shelf of paper towels in front of it. He quit that night, left the keys on the front desk and drove off into the dawn, eyes wide every time he saw an old mine shaft by the side of the highway. They say the Moonlight Pines Motel still stands, the walls rotting a little more every year. New clerks come and go. Some say they hear scraping late at night, echoing through the vent behind the desk. If you listen closely, they say you'll hear the knock, thud, thud, thud. And if you're fool enough to open the hidden door and follow the tunnel down, you'll see him, waiting at the end. He doesn't want to be alone. He wants to trade places. And once you see him, once he sees you, the tunnel never really lets you go. It was finals week at St. Mary's College, the old campus perched on a hill, its stone buildings looking more like a monastery than a modern school. For most students, the library's extended quiet hours were a blessing. But for Ethan Reyes, they were his lifeline. Ethan was the kind of student who scribbled notes on napkins, chugged energy drinks like water, and pulled all-nighters just to scrape by. Tonight, he had 3 papers due by sunrise and not a word typed yet. So at 2:52 a.m., he sat hunched over a rickety desk in the deepest corner of the St. Mary's main library, a Gothic behemoth with 4 floors of dusty stacks, echoing stairwells, and more shadows than light. The fluorescent lights above flickered every few minutes, buzzing just loud enough to drive him insane. Ethan rubbed his eyes, cracked his neck, and scanned the row of books next to his study Corel. That's when he noticed it, an old wooden door, tucked behind a rolling shelf marked reference, A.Z. It wasn't there last week, he was sure of it. He'd practically lived in this aisle for days. Curious, and desperate for an excuse to stand up, Ethan pushed the shelf aside and reached for the knob. It was ice-cold, old brass, worn smooth by countless hands. The door swung open with a dry groan. On the other side, dim yellow lights flickered down a narrow hallway lined with arched windows, but the windows were bricked up from the outside, like the world had moved on and left this passage behind. A tarnished plaque above the archway read, "Special Collections, Silent Wing." Ethan frowned. He'd never seen Silent Wing on any map of the library. He stepped through, half expecting alarms to go off. But the air inside was stale and unmoving, thick with the smell of old parchment. At the end of the corridor, the hallway opened into a cavernous reading room. High, vaulted ceilings stretched above rows of ancient wooden tables. Gas lamps flickered along the walls, though no flame burned in them. Ethan squinted, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. At the tables sat people. Dozens of them, men and women, students by the look of them, dressed in styles from every era. An old man in a tweed suit scribbled in a leather-bound journal. A woman in a poodle skirt leafed through yellowed papers. A boy in a letterman jacket stared glassy-eyed at a thick Latin manuscript. No one spoke. No one looked up. Their eyes stayed locked on the pages before them, lips moving silently as if whispering secrets to the paper. Ethan's curiosity got the better of him. He drifted between the tables, heart pounding in his chest, the echo of his footsteps muffled by the worn carpet. He peered over the shoulder of a pale young woman whose hair hung in damp, dark curls. The book she read was bound in cracked green leather. Its pages were filled with a spidery, shifting script that seemed to rearrange itself whenever he tried to focus. He reached for it, but the woman's head snapped up. Her eyes were milky white, pupils lost in the fog. She didn't blink. Slowly, the others lifted their heads too. Dozens of hollow stares turned to him, and for the first time, Ethan noticed the dark stains on some of their clothes, the ancient mildew on their cuffs, the way some fingers were nothing but brittle bone. A soft hush filled the room, like a collective inhale before a lecture. At the far end of the reading room stood a massive oak desk, carved with the college crest. Behind it, a figure rose. Tall, thin, draped in a moth-eaten cardigan that looked older than the building itself. The figure's face was hidden by the brim of an old librarian's cap. When he spoke, his voice was dry paper shuffling in the dark. "Late arrival, Mr. Reyes." Ethan flinched. "How do you know my name?" The librarian tilted his head, revealing eyes like black ink. His smile was all cracked teeth. "Everyone here has come for knowledge they weren't meant to find. But you stumbled in early." The ghostly patrons leaned forward in unison, books closing with a single, muffled thud. Pages fluttered to the floor like dead leaves. Ethan stepped back, bumping into a shelf. He felt a low humming in his skull, the words on the fallen pages flickering in his mind like distant thunder. "Look, I didn't mean to, I was just studying." "I'll leave, okay?" he stammered. The librarian spread his hands wide, gesturing to the endless stacks behind him. Shelves rose up into darkness, filled with books that radiated a faint, sickly glow. "You opened the door. You've seen the words. You belong to the collection now." The ghostly students stood, their chairs scraping the floor, surrounding him in a slow, shuffling circle. He felt the weight of their empty eyes on him, a hunger that had nothing to do with food. Ethan backed into the wall, looking for the door, but the passage he'd come through was gone. Just more shelves, books, endless rows of forgotten knowledge. The librarian reached into his desk and withdrew a single slip of brittle paper, a library card. On it, his name was written in looping ink, Ethan Reyes, permanent patron. "You'll find your seat over there. It's been waiting for you." The ghostly student stepped aside, revealing an empty chair at the nearest table. A massive, open book rested on it, its pages blank but for the faint outline of text that shifted and swirled, pulling at the edge of his mind. Ethan felt a force at his back, like invisible hands guiding him forward. He tried to scream, but no sound came. His feet moved of their own accord. He sat. The book flipped open. Words appeared, seeping out like ink in water. When the librarian returned to his desk, the students turned back to their pages. The hush fell again, broken only by the scratch of ghostly pens and the rustle of eternal study. Back in the main library, dawn spilled through stained glass. The cleaning crew bustled in, vacuum humming. The old wooden door behind the rolling shelf creaked open. A single slip of paper drifted out, a library card, brittle and yellowed. It read, "Ethan Reyes, permanent patron." No one noticed as the door swung shut again, vanishing behind the stacks. They say there are places the daylight never really touches, even when the sun is high. Jacob Merritt's orchard was one of those places. Jacob was a third-generation farmer, alone now. His father had died out in the fields one summer, found among the apple trees with his hat pulled low over his eyes. His grandfather, old Elijah, had planted the orchard after the war, but even back then, folks whispered about the land. They said there were bones buried beneath the trees. That the soil had never really been clean. Jacob never paid much mind to old stories. Apples were good money in the fall, and he had a mortgage to keep up with. But one harvest season, the last he'd ever see, Jacob learned that some stories have roots deeper than any tree. It was late September when it began, the nights growing cold, the orchard heavy with fruit ready to pick. Jacob woke around 2 a.m. to the sound of something drifting through his open window. At first he thought it was just the wind. But as he lay there, staring at the cracked plaster ceiling, he realized it was something more, a voice, soft and lilting. A woman's voice, singing a tune he didn't recognize. He pulled on his boots, grabbed his coat, and stepped out onto the porch. The orchard lay beyond the back pasture, neat rows of gnarled trees under a rising harvest moon. The singing came from somewhere deep among them, echoing off the hills. Jacob knew no one should be out there. There wasn't another house for miles. And besides, who would stand among the apple trees singing lullabies in the dead of night? He crossed the pasture with a lantern swinging from his hand. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves like whispered prayers. Every so often, the singing paused, replaced by the soft creak of rope in the branches. As he moved deeper between the rows, he noticed the scarecrows. They'd always been there, just rags stuffed with straw, perched on old fence posts to keep the birds off the apples. But tonight, they seemed different. They weren't in their usual spots, scattered wide to guard every corner of the orchard. Instead, they stood together in a clearing, arranged in a perfect circle. There were 7 of them, straw hats pulled low, burlap faces blank but turned inward toward something at the center. Jacob lifted his lantern. The pale glow flickered across flannel sleeves and faded overalls. And in the center of the circle was a patch of raw, freshly turned earth. A grave. No marker. Just dirt piled high enough to show it hadn't been there long. The singing stopped. Jacob's breath clouded in the cold night air. He stepped closer to the grave, squinting at the rough mound of soil. A single apple sat on top, shriveled, blackened as if rotting from the inside out. He felt something shift under his boot. He knelt down, brushing at the dirt with his bare hand. The soil was wet, slick with decay. His fingertips caught on so. The wind gusted through the trees, carrying the voice back to him. But this time, it was not a song, it was a whisper, breathy and close to his ear. Return what was taken. Jacob stumbled back, nearly dropping the lantern. The scarecrows loomed over him in the dim light, their shadows long and thin against the orchard floor. He tried to remember, had his father ever spoken of this? Old Elijah, muttering half-drunk on the porch, warning him never to dig too deep near the north orchard? But the wind answered for him. The orchard feeds the land must feed it back. In the days that followed, Jacob tried to ignore what he'd seen. He didn't sleep. Every night, the singing returned, drifting through the boards of the old farmhouse. Sometimes he'd see shapes moving among the trees, straw arms swaying like dancers. He looked through his father's old ledgers, searching for any mention of the burial. In a brittle, yellowed notebook, he found it. One short entry from 1938, written in a shaky hand. Storm took the child. Elijah says the orchard needs a keeper. Buried her by the old stand. Scarecrows will guard her. No name. No explanation. Just a terrible, unspoken pact that had lain under his feet his whole life. On the fourth night, the orchard came to him. Jacob woke to the sound of footsteps on the porch, soft, dragging footsteps like sacks of straw pulled through mud. He peered through the curtains. The scarecrows stood at the edge of the pasture, ringed in mist under the pale moonlight. And at their center, a figure in a white dress, the shape of a girl, hair long and dripping with orchard dirt. Her voice drifted across the fields. A keeper for a keeper. Jacob understood, though no words were spoken. The orchard had given its fruit for decades, sweet and plentiful. When the soil turned sour, his grandfather had buried something precious to feed it, to keep the land alive. Now the orchard was hungry again. The next morning, the sheriff found the farm deserted. The house was empty, breakfast dishes still on the table. The orchard looked untouched, except for the clearing where the scarecrows stood. They were in a circle again, just as before. But this time there were 8 of them. In the center, a fresh mound of earth. A battered work boot stuck out from the soil, Jacob's boot, laces trailing like roots. No one ever tended the orchard again. The trees grew wild, branches heavy with sweet, red fruit that no birds would touch. On quiet nights when the wind is right, some say you can hear singing among the rows, a lullaby carried on the breeze, and the soft rustle of straw bodies swaying in a circle forever guarding the grave. When you work in real estate long enough, you get used to strange properties, crumbling Victorian money pits, homes where the basement floods every spring, condos haunted by the smell of stale cigarettes. But Marissa Keller, top seller at Oak and Pine Realty, prided herself on moving any house, no matter how troubled. She was ambitious, charming, and desperate to close one last sale before the quarter ended, a sale big enough to bump her bonus and keep her name on the office leaderboard. So when her boss slid a dusty folder across the desk marked Hawthorne Lane, foreclosure, she didn't hesitate. "They say it's bad luck," her boss muttered, barely looking at her. "Neighbors call it the bleeding house. Last guy on this listing quit the same day." Marissa laughed it off. A house that bleeds? People were so gullible. She'd sell it in a week. Hawthorne Lane was a forgotten stretch on the edge of town, old maples lining cracked sidewalks, streetlights flickering like dying stars. The house was a 1920s colonial, 3 stories tall with flaking white paint and a heavy black door warped by decades of rain. It had been empty for 6 years. The last owner, an eccentric dentist named Dr. Vance, had vanished without a trace. The bank repossessed it after a local kid broke in and found the place abandoned, food still rotting on the table. Marissa stepped inside with her clipboard, high heels clicking on the dusty parquet floor. The air smelled stale, like mold and something sweet underneath, faint but cloying. The house seemed fine, if dated: tall windows, cracked plaster walls, a grand staircase curling up like a spine. The only odd thing was the basement door, padlocked from the outside. Probably to keep kids out, she told herself, jotting down new lock needed on her notes. As she left, she didn't notice the dark streak trailing down the corner of the living room wall. Like something had seeped out from behind the wallpaper, then dried into a faint rust-colored stain. A week later, after some light staging and fresh flowers to cover the smell, Marissa hosted the open house. She put out cookies and cider in the foyer, printed glossy brochures, and lit vanilla candles in every room. At first, the guests were polite but wary. They whispered about Dr. Vance, the rumors of strange noises at night, stories of local teens daring each other to spend the night and running out screaming about blood on the walls. Marissa smiled through it all. Urban legends. The plumbing's old, that's all. Old pipes rust, paint peels, easy fix. You're getting a piece of history. She didn't notice the first drop until a young couple with a baby pointed it out. Is that leaking?" the husband asked, gesturing up the stairs. A dark streak was seeping down the wall beside the staircase, thick, reddish, and slow. It pulsed from a hairline crack in the plaster, forming a teardrop that fell onto the hardwood with a dull splat. Marissa laughed nervously. Rusty pipes. She grabbed a paper towel from the kitchen, dabbed at the wall, but when she pulled her hand back, the towel was soaked crimson, warm to the touch. Guests began to drift out, muttering about bad energy and bad plumbing. A teenage girl snapped photos on her phone, whispering that it looked just like blood. Marissa climbed the stairs, determined to show them it was nothing. But on the second-floor landing, she found more, thin trickles running down from the ceiling corners, weeping from the crown molding like tears. She flicked on the attic light. The beams overhead were dry, no broken pipes, no water damage she could see. But the smell in the attic was stronger now, coppery and sour, like raw meat left in the sun. She backed away, shoes sticking to the floor where the liquid had pooled. One couple lingered, a middle-aged pair who claimed to be paranormal investigators with a YouTube channel. They peppered Marissa with questions. "Has anyone died here? Do you know about the basement? Did they find Dr. Vance's body?" Marissa was done entertaining ghost hunters. She grabbed the basement key from her purse, determined to prove it was just a damp foundation and bad insulation. The padlock creaked open. The door swung inward, revealing stone steps slick with moisture. Her phone flashlight barely cut through the dark. The smell hit her like a slap, metallic, thick, heavy. At the bottom, she found the old root cellar, low ceiling, stone walls, dirt floor. And in the center, a shallow. After the final failed showing, Marissa Keller didn't come back to the Oak and Pine office for 2 days. Her co-workers assumed she'd finally burned out. The house on Hawthorne Lane was the last straw, they joked. She'd probably move somewhere sunny and flip condos instead. But the truth was, Marissa couldn't get the house out of her head. She saw it behind her eyelids when she tried to sleep, the walls pulsing like veins under skin, the red trickling down in thin, steady rivulets that pooled at her feet in the dream. And underneath it all, that whisper she'd heard in the basement, slipping through the cracks like steam. You can't sell what isn't yours. So the next night, in a storm that rattled the streetlights and turned the old maples into clawing shadows, Marissa went back, alone. She parked under the dripping branches, stared at the dark windows, and told herself she'd end it. One last walk through, one last look. Maybe she'd find the broken pipe, the rotted beam, the buried cistern or carcass that explained the bleeding. She'd call the city inspector in the morning. She'd prove it was just plumbing, not some curse with teeth. Inside, the air was thicker than ever, warm and sour, with that faint copper tang that stuck to the back of her throat. She traced the drip marks along the walls, up the staircase, across the
second floor landing. They led her like veins through the body of the house, all pointing back to the basement door. She stood at the top of the steps, the old padlock dangling from the knob, open since the open house. The smell rose up to greet her, iron, mold, something sweet beneath it. She forced herself down, one trembling step at a time, her phone's flashlight flickering in her sweaty grip. In the root cellar, the pit was wider than before. The boards that lined it were gone, revealing raw, black earth that shimmered wetly in the pale beam. Blood, there was no denying it now, seeped from the stone walls, pooled in the pit, and disappeared into the soil like it was feeding roots below. Marissa stumbled forward, gagging on the smell. Her foot struck something, the old dental chair, half buried under debris. She swung her light over it, cracked leather, rusted metal, straps dangling like limp hands. A scrap of paper lay pinned under one of its legs. She snatched it up, heart racing. A faded patient card, stamped with Dr. Vance's name. Scribbled across it in shaky, frantic handwriting were the words. The house feeds. It remembers. It bleeds what it takes. A wet sound, like something breathing through mud, rose up from the pit behind her. She turned. The soil bubbled, dark liquid oozing out and over the rim, inching toward her boots. She ran. She crashed into the stone steps, slipping on the wet floor, scraping her hands raw as she clawed her way up. But when she reached the basement door, she found it shut, stuck tight, as if the wood had swollen or the house itself pressed it closed from the other side. She screamed for help, though no one would hear. Her fists pounded the door until they stung, nails splitting, but the boards behind her moaned and cracked, the walls weeping thicker streams that ran together in a sluggish, pulsing current. Below her feet, she felt the vibration, like a heartbeat in the foundation. A slow, steady thump echoing through the stone and dirt. The same heartbeat she'd felt behind the walls that first day. When they found her car the next morning, keys still in the ignition, the police searched the house. They found the front door wide open, rain blowing in through broken panes. They found footprints, soaked in rust-colored water, trailing down the basement stairs, but no sign of Maurice Keller. The pit in the root cellar was gone, boards nailed back down over the raw soil, as if it had never been disturbed. The dental chair sat rusting in the corner, shadows pooling around its cracked leather seat. On the foyer wall, just inside the black front door, the plaster was still wet. A dark red stain bloomed there like a fresh bruise. And when the next agent came to look it over, he could swear the stain looked like a silhouette, a woman's outline, her arm reaching toward the door that would never quite open again.